The shutter clicks of the paparazzi sounded like gunfire outside the New York Supreme Court. Marcus Sterling, the tech mogul worth $40 billion, walked up the steps holding the hand of his mistress, a 22-year-old Instagram model. He wasn't hiding. He was smiling. He looked at his wife, Mina, standing alone in the shadows, and winked. He thought his ironclad prenup and his high-priced legal team had secured his freedom and his fortune. But Marcus made one fatal calculation error. He didn't know what was inside the manila envelope sitting on Judge Thorne's bench. It wasn't just a divorce decree. It was a DNA test that would rewrite his past, destroy his future, and turn that billion-dollar smile into a scream of terror. This is the story of how the arrogant fall. October 14th, 2024. The air in Lower Manhattan was crisp, but the atmosphere outside the courthouse was scorching hot. If you read Forbes or followed the tech sector, you knew Marcus Sterling. He was the CEO of Sterling Apex, a defense contracting firm that had recently secured a $1 trillion government tender. He was the golden boy of Wall Street, charming, ruthless, and unmistakably handsome in his bespoke Brioni suit. On this Tuesday morning, Marcus exited his blacked-out Maybach, not with his legal counsel, but with Tiffany Lacroix. Tiffany was everything Marcus's PR team had warned him against: loud, flashy, and famously messy on social media. She wore a white dress, an audacious choice for a mistress attending a divorce hearing, and massive Chanel sunglasses. They walked up the stairs like they were attending the Met Gala. Marcus waved to the cameras. He looked relaxed. Why wouldn't he be? According to the court filings leaked to the New York Post just days prior, Marcus had an infidelity clause in his prenuptial agreement that was surprisingly lax. More importantly, he had the sterility leverage. We'll get to that later. Standing on the opposite side of the plaza was Mina Sterling. Mina was 42, 3 years younger than Marcus, but the tabloids liked to paint her as tired and aging. She had been with Marcus since the garage days, before the billions, before the private jets. Today, she wore a simple navy blazer and slacks. No jewelry, no entourage, just her lawyer, Harrison Vance. Vance was a legend in New York family law, a man known as the Undertaker, because when he showed up, someone's social life was about to die. But today, Vance looked grim. He wasn't talking to the press. "Look at her," Marcus whispered to Tiffany, loud enough for a reporter from TMZ to catch on a boom mic. "She looks like she's attending a funeral." Tiffany giggled, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet, a gift Marcus had bought her with marital funds just last week. "Maybe she is, baby. A funeral for her bank account." They laughed. They actually laughed as they passed Mina on the steps. Mina didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She just stared at the granite steps, clutching a leather binder to her chest so tightly her knuckles were white. Inside courtroom 304, the atmosphere changed. The Honorable Lydia Thorne was presiding. Judge Thorne was not a woman who cared about net worth. She had sent senators to prison and stripped oligarchies of their yachts. As the bailiff called all rise, Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his legs. He checked his Patek Philippe watch. He had a board meeting at 2:15 p.m. He expected this to be wrapped up by lunch. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Thorne said, her voice cutting through the silence, "you seem amused." Marcus stood up, flashing that famous smile that had graced the cover of Time magazine. "Just eager to proceed, Your Honor. The truth is simple. My marriage is over. I am ready to pay Mina the stipend outlined in our 2005 agreement and move on with my life." "The stipend," the judge repeated dryly. $5,000 a month for a woman who helped build a $40 billion company. "She was a secretary, Your Honor," Marcus said dismissively. She filed papers. I built the code. The prenup stands. Minar sat silently. She hadn't spoken a word yet. Judge Thorne adjusted her glasses. We will see about that. Mr. Vance, is the plaintiff ready to present her case? Harrison Vance stood up. He didn't look at the judge. He looked directly at Marcus. We are, Your Honor. But we aren't here to argue the prenup. We are here to argue paternity and fraud. Marcus laughed, a short, sharp bark of a laugh. Paternity. We have no children. That's the point. Not with Mrs. Sterling, no, Vance said, his voice dropping an octave. But you claim to be expecting one with Miss Lacroix, and that child is the reason you are rushing this divorce, isn't it? Marcus smirked, placing a protective hand on Tiffany's stomach. That's right. My heir. A son. Something Minar could never give me. Vance smiled. It was a terrifying expression. Well, that brings us to the first twist of the morning, because according to the medical records you tried to burn 3 days ago, that shouldn't be biologically possible, should it, Marcus? The smile on Marcus's face didn't vanish yet. It just froze. To understand the gravity of that moment, we have to go back to 2018. Minar Sterling had always wanted children. For 10 years of their marriage, they had tried. IVF clinics in Switzerland, hormone specialists in California, holistic healers in Bali. Every time a test came back negative, Marcus would sigh, look at Minar with deep disappointment, and say, "It's okay, darling. I know you're broken. I love you anyway." He had convinced the world, and Minar, that she was the infertile one. He played the role of the supportive, suffering husband perfectly. But inside the courtroom, Harrison Vance was currently projecting a document onto the screens. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a medical chart from the Geneva Institute of Urological Health. Objection! Marcus's lawyer, a high-priced shark named Bolton, jumped up. This is private medical data protected by HIPAA and international privacy laws. Overruled, Judge Thorne said, her eyes scanning the document. This was submitted into evidence by the plaintiff regarding the fraud counterclaim. Sit down, Mr. Bolton. Vance walked toward the witness stand, but he kept his eyes on Tiffany Lacroix, the mistress. Ms. Lacroix, Vance said, you are currently 4 months pregnant, is that correct? Tiffany stood up, looking confused. Yes, with Marcus's son. We're going to name him Marcus Jr. And you are certain Marcus is the father? Of course I am, she snapped, looking at Mina with disdain. Just because she's dried up doesn't mean Marcus is. He's a virile man. Vance nodded slowly. He turned back to the screen. Exhibit A, he announced. A vasectomy report dated November 12, 2003, 2 years before Marcus married Mina. The courtroom gasped. The reporters in the back row started typing furiously on their laptops. Marcus's face went pale. The confident tan seemed to drain away instantly. You see, Vance continued, pacing the floor. Mr. Sterling didn't want children. He never did. He wanted a legacy, money, and freedom. So he had a secret procedure done in his early 20s. He never told Mina. For 15 years he watched her inject herself with painful hormones, watched her cry over negative pregnancy tests, watched her blame herself for being less of a woman, all while knowing he was shooting blanks. Mina, sitting at the plaintiff's table, finally looked up. Her eyes were filled with tears, but not of sadness, of rage. This was the first time the public realized that Mina knew. She had found out, and she had waited for this exact moment to reveal it. That's a lie, Marcus shouted, losing his cool for the first time. That document is forged. I reversed it. I had a reversal surgery in 2020. Did you? Vance asked calmly. We couldn't find any record of that. But let's assume you did. Let's assume you are capable of fathering a child." Vance walked over to the judge's bench and picked up a sealed plastic bag. Inside was a toothbrush and a hairbrush. "Ms. Lacroix," Vance said, turning back to the mistress. "We didn't just trust the paperwork. We hired a private investigator to retrieve DNA samples from your trash 2 weeks ago. Illegal? Maybe. Admissible in a civil fraud case regarding the legitimacy of a prenup dependent on an heir. Absolutely." Judge Thorne leaned forward. "Get to the point, Mr. Vance." "The point, Your Honor, is that we ran a prenatal paternity test using the fetal DNA circulating in Ms. Lacroix's blood. A non-invasive procedure she consented to at her OB/GYN last week, thinking it was a routine screening for Down syndrome. We subpoenaed the results." Marcus turned to Tiffany. "You authorized a test?" "I thought it was for the baby's health," Tiffany shrieked, her voice cracking. "I didn't know they were checking for you." Vance held up a piece of paper. "The results show that the probability of Marcus Sterling being the father of the child carried by Ms. Lacroix is 0.00%. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus stared at Tiffany. His jaw dropped. "What?" Tiffany's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. She started shaking her head. No, the test is wrong. Marcus, baby, they're lying to you." "But that's not the twist, Your Honor," Vance said, his voice rising. "The twist isn't that the mistress is cheating on the cheater. That's poetic justice. The twist is who the father actually is." Vance clicked a button on his remote. A new photo appeared on the screen. It was a picture of Marcus's personal driver and head of security, a man named Gregor Volkov, a man who had been by Marcus's side, and apparently Tiffany's side, for 3 years. "DNA matches Mr. Gregor Volkov with 999% certainty." The courtroom erupted. Judge Thorne banged her gavel, but no one listened. Marcus Sterling, the billionaire genius, looked at Tiffany. Then he looked at the empty chair behind him where his security chief usually sat. Gregor wasn't there today. Marcus turned to Tiffany, his voice a low growl. "You slept with the driver?" "He listened to me," Tiffany screamed, abandoning the act. "He was there when you were at board meetings. He actually cares about me." Marcus stood up, his hands shaking. "I'm cutting you off. You get nothing. Get out of my sight." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Thorne commanded. "We are not finished. The paternity fraud is established. But Mr. Vance, how does this affect the divorce settlement? If there is no child, we revert to the original prenup, do we not?" This was the moment Minar had been waiting for. She stood up. Her voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the room. "No, Your Honor," Minar said, "because the prenup has a moral turpitude clause. Clause 14b. It states that if one party commits calculated medical fraud to cause psychological harm to the other, the prenup is voided entirely." Marcus froze. He knew the clause. He had put it in there to stop Minar from lying about taking birth control. He never thought it would be used against him regarding his secret vasectomy. "He let me suffer for a decade," Minar said, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "He committed fraud every day. He let me walk into a fertility clinic. The prenup is dead, Marcus, and so is your reputation." Marcus looked at his lawyer. Bolton was burying his head in his hands. The ironclad prenup was gone. This was now a standard divorce in New York State, an equitable distribution state. That meant Minor was entitled to 50%, $20 billion. But as Marcus slumped into his chair, looking defeated, Judge Thorne cleared her throat. She held up the manila envelope she had been guarding since the session began. "You seem to think the show is over, Mr. Vance." "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "but this court has received another document." An envelope delivered this morning from the Department of Justice. Marcus's eyes widened. The DOJ? It seems, Judge Thorne said, opening the seal, that the testimony regarding Mr. Sterling's sterility triggered an automatic audit of his government contracts, specifically the Legacy Soldier Program. Marcus stopped breathing. The Legacy Soldier Program was Apex Dynamics' crown jewel. It was a biosecurity contract worth billions, based on Marcus's claim that he had isolated a specific gene sequence, a gene sequence he claimed to possess himself, a gene sequence for superior cognitive endurance. If Mr. Sterling has been medically sterile since 2003, Judge Thorne read from the DOJ memo, then the genetic samples he provided to the Pentagon in 2015 to secure the contract could not have been his. Minar looked at Vance. Even Vance looked surprised. This wasn't part of their plan. This was something much bigger. If the samples were faked, the judge continued, looking over her glasses at a terrified Marcus, then Apex Dynamics has committed federal treason by defrauding the United States military. The doors to the back of the courtroom burst open. It wasn't the press. 6 federal agents in windbreakers marked FBI marched down the aisle. Marcus Sterling stood up, panic in his eyes. He looked at the exit, but the bailiffs had already moved to block the side doors. He looked at Minna. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't look at her with pity or arrogance. He looked at her with desperation. Minna, tell them it's a mistake. Minna looked at the man who had wasted her youth, gaslighted her into depression, and paraded his mistress in front of her. She looked at the FBI agents closing in. She smiled. It was a small, cold smile. "I can't, Marcus," she whispered. "I'm just a secretary. I don't understand the science." The chaos inside courtroom 304 wasn't the kind you see in movies where people gasp and faint. It was the chaotic, shuffling noise of reality crashing down. It was the sound of heavy boots hitting the parquet floor, the click of safety holsters, and the frantic whispering of legal teams realizing their billable hours just evaporated. Special Agent Thomas Miller, a man with a face carved from granite and a suit that cost less than Marcus's socks, stepped up to the defense table. "Marcus Sterling," Miller said, his voice flat. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States government, violation of the False Claims Act, and 3 counts of wire fraud." Marcus recoiled as if Miller were holding a contagious disease. "Do not touch me," Marcus hissed, backing up against the mahogany railing. "Do you know who I am? I have dinner with the Vice President next week. Call the White House. Call General Holloway." "General Holloway is the one who signed the warrant, Mr. Sterling," Miller said, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around, hands behind your back. Bolton, do something!" Marcus screamed at his lawyer. Bolton, the shark who usually charged $500 an hour, was currently busy stuffing papers into his briefcase and looking for the nearest exit. "I represent you in civil family matters, Marcus," Bolton muttered, not making eye contact. "I don't do federal treason cases. You're on your own." The betrayal hit Marcus harder than the cuffs. The metal ratcheted tight around his wrists that had never lifted anything heavier than a champagne flute in 20 years. As the agents hauled Marcus toward the side exit, the scene turned into a circus. Tiffany Lacroix, realizing her meal ticket was being dragged away in chains, tried to slip out the back. "Not so fast, Miss Lacroix," a female agent said, stepping in her path. "I didn't do anything," Tiffany squealed, clutching her stomach. "I'm pregnant. I'm a victim here." "You're a material witness to the paternity fraud," the agent said. "And we have questions about the gifts Mr. Sterling purchased for you using funds from the Legacy Soldier accounts. That makes you an accessory to money laundering. You're coming with us." Tiffany's scream was shrill enough to shatter glass. She was led out in tears, her Chanel sunglasses knocked askew, looking far less like a model and more like a terrified child who had played a game she didn't understand. But the real scene, the one the cameras outside were waiting for, was minor. Harrison Vance, Mina's lawyer, packed up his files calmly. He looked at the empty defense table, then at the judge. "Your Honor, I assume we will need to recess until Mr. Sterling makes bail." Judge Thorne looked over her glasses. "Mr. Vance, given the flight risk associated with $40 billion and access to private jets, I highly doubt Mr. Sterling will be making bail. I am freezing all marital assets immediately to prevent liquidation. We are adjourned." Mina stood up. She smoothed her blazer. She didn't look at the empty spot where her husband had stood. She walked down the center aisle, her head high. As she pushed open the heavy oak doors of the courthouse, the world exploded. Hundreds of flashbulbs went off at once. Reporters shouted questions, fighting to get a microphone in her face. "Mrs. Sterling, did you know he was faking the military contracts? Mina, how do you feel about the Mistress sleeping with the driver? Mina, are you going to take over the company?" Mina stopped at the top of the stairs. The wind caught her hair. She looked out at the sea of vultures who had called her old and washed up just yesterday. She leaned toward the nearest microphone, a CNN feed. The crowd went silent, expecting a tearful breakdown. "Gentlemen," Mina said, her voice steady and cool as ice water. "My husband always said business is about leverage. I simply found mine." She put on a pair of black sunglasses, stepped into a waiting Uber, not a limo, a sensible Toyota Camry Uber, and drove away, leaving the media in a stunned silence. To understand how a secretary took down a titan of industry, we have to rewind 6 months. April 2024. The Sterling Mansion in the Hamptons. Mina was in the library. It was 2 a.m. Marcus was in Tokyo on business, which Mina knew meant he was in a 5-star hotel with a 20-year-old hostess. For years, she had ignored it. She had stayed for the lifestyle, for the hope of a child, for the fear of being alone at 40. But that week, something had changed. Marcus had come home drunk and cruel. He had laughed at her when she mentioned adoption. "Why would I want some stranger's broken DNA in my house?" he had sneered. "My genes are perfect. If you can't carry them, that's your failure, Mina, not mine." That comment gnawed at her. My genes are perfect. Mina was organizing the household bills, a task Marcus thought was beneath him, so he left it to the help. He didn't realize that managing the bills meant seeing everything. She was logging into the family's cloud server to download a utility invoice. Marcus, arrogant and careless, used the same password for everything, Apex God 1. While searching for the electric bill, she noticed a folder titled Old Med, Archive. It was buried deep in a subdirectory of a subdirectory. Marcus was a tech genius, but he was also a digital hoarder. He never deleted anything. He just hid it. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. Mina opened it. The first file was a PDF, Vasectomy Post-Op Instructions, Dr. Aris Thorne, Zurich, 2003. Mina stared at the screen. The room seemed to spin. She felt bile rise in her throat. 2003. 2 years before their wedding. He had let her undergo 12 rounds of IVF. The needles, the bruises on her stomach, the devastating phone calls from doctors telling her eggs were failing. The nights she spent crying on the bathroom floor, apologizing to him for being barren. He had watched it all. He had held her hand and faked sympathy. He was sterilized the whole time. She didn't scream. She didn't throw the computer. A cold, hard numbness settled over her. This wasn't just a lie. It was torture. It was psychological warfare. She kept clicking. She found the second folder. Legacy Soldier, Pentagon Specs. She knew about the project. Marcus bragged about it constantly. It was based on his own alpha genome. But as she cross-referenced the dates, the math didn't work. If he was sterile, he couldn't produce the sperm samples required for the genetic baseline testing in 2015. So, whose samples were they? She found a payment ledger. Consulting fee, G. Volkov, 500,000 asalos. Gregor, the driver, the ex-Russian Special Forces bodyguard who was built like a tank. The pieces clicked together. Marcus had bought Gregor's genetic material, passed it off as his own to the military to prove his superhuman health metrics, and secured a $1 trillion contract. Minar closed the laptop. She sat in the dark for an hour, listening to the ocean crash against the cliffs outside. She could divorce him. She could get a few million and leave. No, she thought. That's not enough. He stole my motherhood. He stole my dignity. I'm going to take everything. The next morning, she didn't call a divorce lawyer. She called Harrison Vance, the most ruthless litigator in New York. Mr. Vance, she had said, over a burner phone she bought at a gas station. I want to hire you, but I don't want to file yet. I want to build a trap. I'm listening, Vance had replied. I need a private investigator to trail his mistress. I need DNA from her trash, and I need you to find a contact at the Department of Justice who handles contractor fraud. I'm going to hand you the biggest case of your life on a silver platter. And what do you want in return, Mrs. Sterling? I want to see him smile, Minar said. I want to see him smile right up until the moment the floor drops out. Back in the present, Minar sat in the back seat of the Uber, watching the city skyline blur past. She took a deep breath. She hadn't just won a court case. She had exorcised a demon. The Metropolitan Detention Center, MDC, in Brooklyn, is not the Ritz-Carlton. It is a grim, concrete fortress, known for freezing temperatures, flickering lights, and a smell that is a mix of bleach and despair. Marcus Sterling sat on a steel cot. His Brioni suit was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that scratched his skin. His Patek Philippe had been catalogued and locked in a baggie. He had been there for 6 hours. He hadn't seen a judge. He hadn't been offered water. "Guard!" Marcus yelled, gripping the bars. "I need to make a call. This is a violation of my civil rights. Do you know who I am?" The guard, a large man, who looked like he had heard this speech 1,000 times, didn't even look up from his magazine. "You're inmate 8940. Shut up, or you go to solitary." Marcus slumped back. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. He would wake up in his penthouse. Tiffany would be bringing him an espresso, and they would laugh about this. But the steel was cold. The reality was setting in. Finally, the buzzer sounded. "Sterling, lawyer." Marcus practically ran to the visitation room. He expected to see a team of top-tier attorneys ready to get him out. Instead, he saw a public defender, a young woman named Sarah trying to balance 3 folders in her arms. "Where is Bolton?" Marcus demanded. "Mr. Bolton has formally recused himself due to non-payment," Sarah said, sitting down and opening a file. "Your assets have been frozen, Mr. Sterling. All of them. The DOJ obtained a seizure order for your bank accounts, your stock portfolio, and your real estate holdings. You currently don't have the funds to pay private counsel." "Frozen?" Marcus gasped. "But I have offshore accounts. The Caymans." "They got those too," Sarah said. "Apparently, your wife provided the account numbers." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Mena." "She knew about the Caymans?" "Okay," Marcus stammered. "Okay, so I'm stuck here for a few days. We'll fight this. It's a misunderstanding." Sarah looked at him with pity. "Mr. Sterling, the FBI raided Apex Dynamics an hour ago. They found the original samples in a cryo-freezer in your private office. They matched the DNA to your driver, Gregor Volkov." "Gregor," Marcus whispered. "Where is he?" "Mr. Volkov was arrested at JFK Airport, trying to board a flight to Moscow. He has already cut a deal. He's testifying against you in exchange for immunity. He's telling them everything. The fake samples, the bribes, the money laundering through the Mistress." Marcus put his head in his hands. The walls were closing in. Gregor was talking. "And Tiffany?" Marcus asked weakly. Is she okay?" Sarah hesitated. She pulled out an iPad and tapped the screen. "You might want to see this." She turned the tablet around. It was a live stream of the view. Tiffany Lacroix was sitting on the couch, crying into a tissue, surrounded by the hosts. "I was a victim," Tiffany sobbed on the screen. "Marcus is a monster. He promised me he was divorced. He told me he wanted a family. I didn't know he was using me to launder money. I'm just a girl from Ohio. I'm writing a book to warn other women about men like him." "She's writing a book?" Marcus whispered. "And the baby?" the host asked. "I'm keeping it," Tiffany said bravely. "Gregor is the father, and unlike Marcus, Gregor is a real man. We're going to raise this baby with the money from the book deal." Marcus stared at the screen. The woman he had risked his marriage for, the woman he had paraded in front of Minor, was now burying him on national television to save her own skin. "It's over, Mr. Sterling," the public defender said gently. "The DOJ is offering a plea deal. 25 years. If you go to trial, they'll go for life." Marcus Sterling, the man who thought he was a god, looked at the concrete wall. He thought about Minar. He thought about the way she had looked at him in court, not with anger, but with total indifference. He realized then that the most dangerous person in the world wasn't the FBI or the general. It was the wife he had underestimated. "I need to speak to Minar," Marcus croaked. "She declined your visitation request," Sarah said, closing the folder. "She sent a message, though." "What?" Marcus asked, desperate for anything. She said, "Enjoy the silence. I finally am." November 2025, 1 year after the arrest. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was besieged. It was the trial of the century. The Sterling fraud had become a case study in business schools overnight. Inside, Marcus Sterling looked like a ghost of his former self. The year in pre-trial detention had taken its toll. His hair was grey and thinning. He had lost 30 pounds. The arrogant smile was gone, replaced by a permanent scowl of disbelief. He had refused the plea deal. His narcissism wouldn't allow him to admit defeat. He was convinced he could charm the jury. He was convinced he could talk his way out of it. He was wrong. The prosecution, led by U.S. Attorney Sarah Vance, no relation to Harrison but equally sharp, had been ruthless. For 3 weeks they paraded the evidence. They showed the jury the faked lab reports. They played the audio recordings Gregor Volkov had secretly made of Marcus ordering him to keep the mistress happy. They brought Tiffany Lacroix to the stand. She had been granted immunity for her testimony. She cried on cue, painting herself as a naive girl, manipulated by a powerful predator. Marcus had to be restrained by his court-appointed lawyer when Tiffany described him as pathetic and obsessed with a legacy he couldn't biologically create. But the final nail in the coffin wasn't Tiffany. It wasn't Gregor. It was the whistleblower. For months, the identity of the person who tipped off the DOJ had been protected under seal. Marcus had theorized it was a rival CEO, or perhaps a disgruntled engineer. "The prosecution calls its final witness," Sarah Vance announced. the relator in this qui tam action under the False Claims Act, Mrs. Mina Sterling. The courtroom gasped. Marcus froze. Mina walked in. She looked radiant. She wasn't wearing the drab navy suits of a scorned wife anymore. She wore a cream-colored cashmere coat and stood with a posture that commanded respect. She took the stand. "Mrs. Sterling," the prosecutor asked, "when did you discover the fraud?" "April 14th, 2024, Mina replied, her voice clear. "And why did you wait 6 months to report it? Why time it with the divorce hearing?" Mina turned her head. She looked directly at Marcus. For the first time in the entire trial, their eyes locked. "Because," Mina said, addressing the jury, "justice isn't just about the law, it's about the truth. Marcus spent 15 years making me feel small, broken, and useless because I couldn't give him a child. He built a fraudulent empire on the lie of his own genetic superiority. I wanted him to lose his empire and his reputation on the same day. I wanted him to feel the powerlessness he forced onto me. Objection, Marcus's lawyer shouted. Prejudicial. Overruled, the judge said quietly. The witness is establishing motive. The prosecutor leaned in. Mrs. Sterling, did you aid in the fraud? No, Mina said. I exposed it. Under the False Claims Act, I filed a sealed complaint with the Department of Justice before my divorce hearing even began. Marcus's eyes widened. He finally understood. She hadn't just found the evidence. She had become a federal whistleblower. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Verdict: guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, money laundering, perjury. When the judge asked if the defendant had anything to say before sentencing, Marcus stood up. He trembled. It was for the company, he rasped. I built the future. You can't put me in a cage. I'm a visionary. You are a con artist, Mr. Sterling, the judge replied, peering down from the bench. You defrauded the American taxpayers of $4 billion. You defrauded your wife of a life. You are sentenced to 30 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. As the gavel banged, signaling the end of Marcus Sterling's life as a free man, he didn't look at the judge. He screamed at Minar. You ruined me. You're nothing without me. You'll be on the street. Minar didn't flinch. She simply watched the marshals drag him away, his screams echoing in the hallway until the heavy doors slammed shut. The sound of a heavy steel door slamming shut is unique. It doesn't echo. It simply sucks the air out of the room, leaving a vacuum of finality. Marcus Sterling was no longer CEO. He was no longer a billionaire. He was inmate, Norca 49201, 054, at ADX Florence in Colorado, a facility known colloquially as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. This wasn't the white-collar resort prison where corrupt bankers played tennis and learned pottery. This was a supermax administrative security facility. Marcus sat on the edge of a poured concrete slab that served as his bed. The mattress was 2 inches thick and smelled faintly of industrial antiseptic. His cell was 7 feet by 12 feet. There was a stainless steel toilet, a sink with a button that dispensed water for exactly 10 seconds, and a 4-inch slit of a window that looked out only at the sky, designed specifically so inmates could not verify their location within the complex. For the first 3 months, Marcus had maintained his arrogance. He treated the guards like room service staff. He demanded to see the warden. He spent hours pacing the small length of his cell, muttering about appeals and political conspiracies. He convinced himself he was a martyr, a visionary genius persecuted by a government that feared his brilliance. But the silence of ADX Florence is a weapon. Inmates are kept in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. There is no interaction, No networking, no audience. On the 180th day of his sentence, reality finally pierced Marcus's delusion. He had been allowed his 1 hour of recreation, which consisted of standing in a slightly larger concrete cage with a view of a chain-link fence. As he walked in circles, he saw a discarded newspaper from the previous week, blowing against the wire. He snatched it up before the guards could stop him. He was desperate for news of his empire. He expected to see headlines about Apex Dynamics collapsing without him. He expected to see the stock market crashing in protest. Instead, on page 6 of the Wall Street Journal, he found a small blurb. Apex Dynamics assets fully liquidated by Department of Justice. Core technologies acquired by Raytheon. The controversial Legacy Soldier program has been permanently dismantled. There was no protest. There was no crash. The world had simply absorbed his company, stripped it for parts, and moved on. He wasn't a martyr. He was a liquidation sale. Marcus slid down the concrete wall of the recreation cage. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel anger. He felt an agonizing, crushing insignificance. He had sacrificed his marriage, his morality, and his freedom to build a legacy. And in 6 months, that legacy had been erased as if it never existed. He thought of Mina. He closed his eyes and saw her face in the courtroom. Not the shy, submissive wife he had ignored for decades, but the woman in the cream coat who had looked at him with icy indifference. Mina. He whispered to the empty air. The only response was the buzzer, signaling his hour was up. The pawn. While Marcus rotted in Colorado, Tiffany Lacroix was learning a different kind of lesson in a cramped apartment in Queens. The penthouse lifestyle was a distant memory. The Chanel bags, the Cartier bracelets, the Hermes scarves, they were all gone. The FBI had seized most of them as proceeds of crime, and what they hadn't seized, Tiffany had sold to pay for her defense attorney. She sat at a wobbly kitchen table, staring at a letter from a literary agent. Dear Miss Lacroix, while your story has elements of interest, our market analysis suggests the public sympathy for your narrative is low. Focus groups described your role in the Sterling case not as a victim, but as a willing accomplice. We cannot proceed with the publication of The Billionaire's Trap at this time. Tiffany crumbled the letter and threw it across the room. She looked down at the bassinet in the corner. Inside slept a 6-month-old baby boy. He had dark hair and a strong jawline. He looked nothing like Marcus Sterling. He was the spitting image of Gregor Volkov. The irony was suffocating. Tiffany had chased Marcus for his money and his status. She had wanted to be the mother of a billionaire heir. Instead, she was a single mother living off food stamps, raising the son of a Russian bodyguard who had been deported and blacklisted. Gregor sent no money. He sent no letters. He had cut a deal to save his own skin and vanished back into the underworld of Eastern Europe. Tiffany walked over to the window. It was raining. She caught her reflection in the glass. She looked tired. The glamour was gone, stripped away to reveal a terrified young woman who had bet everything on her looks, and lost to a woman who played with her brain. She picked up her phone and opened Instagram. She still had followers, people who followed her to mock her, to leave nasty comments, to watch the train wreck. She navigated to the search bar and typed in a name she told herself she wouldn't look up: Mina Sterling. There were no results, no personal account, no flexing, no drama. But there was a hashtag. The Sterling Initiative. Tiffany clicked it. Photos flooded the screen. A new hospital wing in Zurich, a scholarship fund for women in STEM. And there, in a candid photo taken by a bystander in Italy, was Mina. She was wearing a simple linen dress, laughing, holding a glass of wine. She looked 10 years younger. She looked free. Tiffany dropped the phone on the counter. She finally understood the difference between them. Tiffany had wanted to be rich. Mina had wanted to be free. And in the end, the secretary had outsmarted the model, the bodyguard, and the billionaire. The payday, Washington, D.C., 3 months prior. The conference room at the Department of Justice was imposing. Dark wood, leather chairs, and the seal of the United States on the wall. Mina sat at the head of the table. Beside her was Harrison Vance, the lawyer who had believed her when no one else would. Across from them sat the Assistant Attorney General and a team of federal auditors. The mood was professional, but there was an undercurrent of awe. Whistleblower cases happened, but rarely on this scale, rarely with this level of precision. Mrs. Sterling, the Assistant Attorney General began, sliding a thick binder across the mahogany table. As you know, the False Claims Act allows for a private citizen, a relator, to file a suit on behalf of the government when they have knowledge of fraud against the United States. Mina nodded. I know the law, sir. I read it very carefully the night I found the files. Indeed you did, the official said, a hint of a smile on his face. The recovery from the Sterling Apex liquidation and the seizure of Mr. Sterling's offshore assets has been substantial. We have recovered a total of $3.5 billion. Harrison Vance tapped his pen on the table. And under Section 3730 DD of the Act, since the Justice Department intervened in the action based primarily on Mrs. Sterling's disclosures, she is entitled to the statutory maximum percentage. We aren't disputing that, the official said. The information was impeccable. It saved the military from a disastrous contract. We are prepared to authorize the full 25% award. He opened a leather folder and placed a check on the table. Mina looked down. It wasn't a standard check. It was a U.S. Treasury warrant. Pay to the order of Mina Sterling amount, $875,400,000. The room went silent. Nearly $1 billion. Mina reached out and touched the paper. It was cool to the touch. She thought about the $5,000 monthly allowance Marcus had tried to force on her in the divorce. She thought about the way he scrutinized her grocery receipts. She thought about the times she had to ask him for money to buy a winter coat and how he made her earn it by being the perfect, silent hostess at his parties. This wasn't just money. It was the accumulated value of her silence, her suffering, and her eventual roar. Mrs. Sterling? Harrison whispered. Are you all right? Mina looked up. Her eyes were dry. I'm fine, Harrison. I was just doing the math. The math? Marcus sold his soul for $40 billion, she said softly. But he lost it all. I kept my soul, and I walked away with enough to fix the damage he caused. That seems like a fair exchange rate. She picked up the pen and signed the release forms. Her signature was firm. No tremors. No hesitation. As they walked out of the Department of Justice into the bright sunlight of the Capitol, Harrison turned to her. What now, Mina? You're one of the wealthiest women in the world. New York, Paris, a private island? Mina put on her sunglasses. No islands. Islands are lonely. I'm going somewhere with life, somewhere the soil is good for growing things. The Villa of Second Chances, present day. Ravello, Italy. The Villa Simbrone sits high above the Amalfi coast, a place where the sky and the sea seem to merge into an infinite blue. The air smells of lemon blossoms and sea salt. Mina Sterling sat in the garden, her hands covered in dirt. She was planting hydrangeas. She had hired gardeners, of course, a whole team of them, but she preferred to do the planting herself. There was something healing about digging into the earth, about nurturing something that would bloom She wiped her forehead, leaving a streak of soil on her cheek. She didn't care. The old Minna, the one who worried about appearing perfect for Marcus, was dead. "Grandma!" The shout came from the terrace. Minna stood up, brushing off her knees. Running toward her was a toddler, barely 2 years old, with curly brown hair and a laugh that sounded like bells. Behind him walked Julian, 32 years old, carrying a tray of lemonade. Julian was not Minna's biological son. He was one of the first beneficiaries of the Sterling Initiative. He had been a brilliant medical researcher in Rome, whose funding was cut. Minna's foundation had stepped in, not just to fund his research into genetic diseases, but to mentor him. Over the last 2 years, they had formed a bond that transcended biology. Julian had lost his mother young. Minna had lost the chance to be a mother. They found each other in the wreckage of their pasts. When Julian and his wife, Sophia, had their son, Leo, they didn't ask Minna to be a godmother. They asked her to be nonna. Minna scooped little Leo up into her arms. He smelled of milk and sunshine. "Did you catch the butterfly, Leo?" she asked, tickling his tummy. "Too fast," Leo giggled, burying his face in her shoulder. Julian set the tray down on the stone table. He looked at Minna with a serious expression. "Minna, a letter came for you today. From Colorado." The atmosphere shifted slightly. The wind seemed to cool. Minna set Leo down, letting him run off to chase a beetle. She looked at the envelope in Julian's hand. It was stark white, with the stamp of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. "Do you want me to burn it?" Julian asked. "You don't have to read it." Minna took the envelope. She ran her thumb over the return address. Inmate Sterling. She remembered the man who had walked into court, holding his mistress's hand, winking at her, thinking she was too weak to fight back. She remembered the man who had lied about his vasectomy while watching her endure painful medical treatments. She looked at the letter. Then she looked at Leo playing in the grass. She looked at the view of the ocean, vast and open. "No," Minna said. "Don't burn it." She handed it back to Julian. "Mark it return to sender," she said calmly. "And add a note to the prison mailroom. Tell them to stop forwarding his mail. Mrs. Sterling doesn't live here anymore. My name is Minna." Julian smiled. "Understood." Minna turned back to her garden. She picked up her trowel. She had hydrangeas to plant, and the sun was still high in the sky. She didn't have time for ghosts. In the end, Marcus had been right about one thing. Biology is powerful, but he was wrong about what makes a family. Blood is just chemistry. Love, loyalty, and truth, those are the things that bind people together. Marcus Sterling was rotting in a concrete box with his perfect, sterile genes. Minna was in paradise, surrounded by a family she chose, living a life she built with her own 2 hands. She took a deep breath of the Italian air, filled her lungs, and for the first time in 20 years, she felt completely, irrevocably whole. And that is the story of Minna Sterling. She proved that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting, or the one with the billions, or the one with the title. The most dangerous person is the one who knows the truth and has the patience to wait for the perfect moment to speak it. Marcus thought his money was his shield. He thought his biology was his legacy. But in the end, he lost his fortune to the wife he underestimated, and he lost his legacy to the arrogance that blinded him. Minna didn't just walk away with a settlement. She walked away with her dignity, a new family, and nearly $1 billion of karmic justice. I have a question for you today. Minna returned Marcus's letter without reading it. If you were her, would you have read it just to see him beg, or is silence the ultimate revenge? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I love reading your debates. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. And subscribe for more stories of betrayal, justice, and the karma that comes for us all. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on while you're climbing the ladder. They might just be the one holding it up.